Hello, dear Earthmates. We have a wonderful guest today, and Professor Jennifer Gidley. Is that right? Gidley.
Yes, correct. Gidley.
Gidley. Yes.
Gidley. Because although in French they say Gidley.
Oh yeah.
Which I quite like.
G is a problematic letter in English.
Yes. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. So my guess was correct. You are one of the leading intellectuals of our world, and I am one of your numerous admirers and students. And the ball will be now in your court. And this is thanks to the Turkish publication of your book, The Future, which is one of the wonderful series of Oxford University Press, the very short introduction series. And but of course, this interview will be addressing the whole Earth, all Earthmates. So what would you like to say about, well, yourself? It's the most difficult question to begin with, and then the book and the books. Now I can have my coffee comfortably while you struggle.
Oh, okay. It's too late for me now to have coffee. I had one this morning. I have a Turkish coffee, believe it or not.
Oh.
My partner has one of these little Turkish copper Turkish pots that you put on the stove, and we have Turkish coffee in the mornings.
Oh, how nice.
So there you go.
Right.
So well, I want to thank you, Tarik, for inviting me to have a conversation with you live. In a sense, we've been corresponding on various social media, Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and all these things. And I believe that it was you that facilitated the publication of my book, The Future, in Turkish. Or you were certainly involved in the play of all of that a couple of years ago. So I'm very grateful. It's wonderful to have the book in Turkish. And I've got all these new followers on Twitter with Turkish names. So interesting. So will you, this is in English.
Yes.
Will you put Turkish subtitles or something on the?
I will need to learn it, but at least I want to do it. I want to do it. That's right.
You mean you need to learn Turkish?
That too. I always study Turkish and English every day.
Well, I'm honored to be speaking with you. I regard you as a rather amazing Turkish poet, playwright, writer of all kinds of wonderful things, and now the creator of the Earth. What do we call it? The Earth
civilization.
Earth civilization
dialogues.
Dialogues. Yeah.
8 years ago, I said, "How about the Earth Civilization Project?" I mean, of course, as you mentioned later on, you drew attention to a book called Towards a Planetary Civilization.
Yeah.
And so the idea is not new, but according to Google, maybe I simply added fearfully and maybe courageously Earth civilization. And although the concept of civilization is also debatable, like everything else, but we don't have a better word for now.
Yes, that's right.
And then instead of saying a better world, I just wanted to say project to make it daily and something collective work. And this is nothing new. It's been with us for thousands of years. Yet some people add a few words here and there. So that's, but so I consider myself an Earth civilization or civilization volunteer.
All right. Okay.
That's another thing. But thank you so much for mentioning several points. And so, but by the way, when did you decide to focus on the future that led you to the presidency, international presidency of the Futurists Association, and then the book?
Yes, yes,
I mean,
very good questions, very good questions. Well, it was around about the mid-90s when I became aware of a lot of media in Australia. I'm Australian, I'm speaking from Australia. And there was a lot of media around about young people and a sense of hopelessness about the future. In fact, Australia had a suicide epidemic during the 90s, the 1990s. And I was quite horrified about this. You know, I have a background in psychology, education. I'm a mother of 2 children. I'd worked with a lot of young people. I'd been a teacher. And I'd actually founded a Steiner school. This is going to be a long story. I'd founded a Rudolf Steiner school and I'd run that for 10 years. And I just sort of had this feeling that children that were educated in that way, which was a more holistic, integrated, artistic education system, which developed the whole person's potential, and which was sort of part of the whole stream of going from the German idealists of evolution of consciousness. And I thought to myself, I don't think these children that I've been educating and working with would have such a sense of hopelessness about the future. So I did a master's research. I went back to university and I did a master's research project, and I looked at I studied the future visions and views of these Steiner educated young people in Australia. Did a study of over 100 students, and I compared that with research that had been done in mainstream education. And what I found was the difference was not that they saw the same probable future. They had the same fears and worries about wars and nuclear explosions and inequality and environmental degradation and all those things. But these young people from the Steiner education were much more empowered. They had a sense of empowerment that we can actually change things, that we're the ones that are going to change things. So that was really interesting. So that's a kind of a tangent, because by being involved in that study, I suddenly realized that there was this whole field of future studies, which I hadn't known about. So then I started to get involved with my lecturer, my supervisor at university was involved in the Australian future studies field, and he was connected with various other people. And so I started to get more and more involved in this field of study, and I joined the World Future Studies Federation. And I ran off to the Philippines and did an introductory course in studying future studies. And I got quite involved in it, and I was involved in creating a master's online at the university here in my region that I was working in. And to cut a long story short, by the time that was sort of middle to late 90s, by the time 2009 came around, I was elected as president of the World Future Studies Federation.
Wisely.
So, it's a very interesting organization. It was founded in Paris back in 1973 by a whole lot of a global collection of really interesting philosophers, journalists, activists, sociologists, peace researchers, all kinds of people who were really interested in democratizing the idea of the future. So what was happening prior to that is most of the future studies work was, a lot of it was being done in the US, and it came out of the RAND Corporation, A lot of it was involved in war scenarios. The Russians were doing the same thing. The Germans were also doing war planning and war scenarios. So the whole sort of futures thinking, if you like, was very much obsessed around war and trying to imagine the scenarios of what our enemies might be doing and all this kind of thing. So these people that founded the World Future Studies Federation, they were also the same sort of group of colleagues who founded the Club of Rome, who I'm sure you're aware of. And they said, we've got to do something else. This is really important thinking. This is really important methodologies and awareness and consciousness. We need to apply this same thinking to creating peace in the world and to democratize futures thinking so that it's available to everyone, not just the sort of high-level corporates and military in the US and other parts of Europe and so on. So that's kind of the background of the World Future Studies Federation. It became a UNESCO partner very early on in 1974, and also a UN ECOSOC partner. And so by the time I became president, it was interesting because it was a legacy kind of organization by then, and a lot of the key members were getting quite old. I mean, I'm getting quite old now too, but at the time I was also a very young thinker, which I still am, as you are.
Yeah,
So
you'll always be young.
We'll always be young. We'll always be young thinkers. So I could see that in some ways the organization had got kind of left behind with the big changes that had happened in the early 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't really up with the social media. It wasn't really up with the fact that everybody else was talking about the future, and lots of other organizations were involved in what they called, trend spotting and future proofing and all of these things. So they'd become a little bit sort of closeted, mm-hmm. if you know what I mean, a little bit of a silo around, as happens with many other organizations and ideologies.
Yes, there is this interesting friction and interaction with structures and flowing energies.
Yes,
you cannot do without structures. We all need skeletons, but only a structure without vitality, well,
exactly.
That's something else. So we need both. So
yes,
sometimes
absolutely.
It swings
There's
from one end to another.
Exactly, a sort of a dialectic between form and movement, or form and energy. Actually, funny thing is, I remember now that when I was elected president, in my speech, I wish I could remember the poem, but I spoke a poem about form and movement being the secret of life, that we can have too much form or we can have too much movement. And I'll have to find the poem. My memory's lost it somewhere, but I'll find it and send it to you.
Thank you.
So I finished up being involved in that organisation as president for 8 years. I was re-elected in 2013 in Bucharest, a conference in Romania, and during that second term, I became aware that. Well, I was aware anyway, but I became increasingly aware that there's an enormous amount of literature on future studies that's been developing over these 40, 50 years that the organisation's been going and that the field's been operating. And there was no Oxford book on the future. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was very little in the way of, good commercial scholarly publishers about the future or the future studies field. So obviously lots of stuff had been published, and there's lots of journals, but the journals were sort of publishing their own material, so it was a little bit in-house. So I had a conversation with the commissioning editor of the Oxford Very Short Introductions. And she said, well, we don't have one on the future. Why don't you do one?
Yes.
And I said, well, I'd like to call it future studies. I'd like to call it futures, plural. And she said, oh, no, I think people won't understand. That'll be too academic and whatever. Well, let's just call it the future.
And also the futures might sound something financial, because
exactly, that's another problem. So anyway, she won that argument, and it was published as the future. But it gave me the opportunity to create a whole chapter called The Future Multiplied, which was kind of the story of how the concept of the future shifted in the change from the sort of positivist, predictive, Newtonian universe, which says that, everything is predictable, and as long as we can control all the variables, we'll be able to predict the future, which of course we never will be able to do. And they'd forgotten about quantum physics and Einstein's relativity, which turned linear time on its head. Exactly. And basically, if there is no one future, there's as many futures as there are Earth citizens on the planet.
Yes.
Isn't there? So.
and any singular noun is a trap. To be on the safe side, I always try to consider each singularity plurality. And I mean, so that's just for.
It's interesting. Yes.
So, just like Marxism, Islam's Christianity.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Even myself, I want to say.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Interesting that you raised the word singularity. You know about the Singularity University in the US?
No.
Okay, so it's a whole other conversation. I'll have to shift in my chair. Okay, so there's a guy, a futurist called Ray Kurzweil, and he's created this concept which he says that humans and technology are going to converge somewhere around 2029 is the figure that he's come up with. He's got a very specific time, which I think in my work I talk about how it's an interesting coincidence that that's when Terminator came to Earth, in the movie Terminator. But his whole idea, and others in Silicon Valley like Elon Musk and these various other, the tech gurus, they think that humans are going to converge with technology so that suddenly we're going to become transhuman or post-human. And so we'll be so enhanced with technology and nanotechnology and bioengineering and all these kinds of things that, the singularity will be, according to Ray Kurzweil, the singularity will be where there's no longer any separation between humans and technology. I don't agree with that. You probably know from looking at my work, I'm very much into human-centered futures. And I'm very much into the idea that as human beings, we have the capacity to evolve ourselves.
Exactly.
And that's what we're here for. To consciously evolve ourselves and to help those around, facilitate the evolution of those around us, and our culture, which is, I'm sure, what you're looking at doing with your Earth civilization, Earth mates, and so on, to help facilitate a positive evolution of culture and of planetary, beings and so on. Exactly. So. To me, technology needs to be, it's a tool. Obviously, without technology, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation now. So, I think there's wonderful things about technology. and the advances in technology, but there's a lot of worrying things about the exponential development of technology, where everything that we do is mediated by technology. And I'm particularly concerned about that in terms of education with young people, that young people, you know, little ones that are on computers and screens all the time, they don't even learn to speak properly.
True. And they cannot write.
They can't write, no.
Which is a loss of important skill in terms of
Absolutely.
coordination between the brain and the body, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Marshall McLuhan said back in the 60s, every advance in technology is an atrophying of a human faculty. So, you know, when we learnt to use typewriters and computers and so on, we stopped using our pens as much. You know, I wonder if when you write your poems, do you first write with a pen?
It depends. I sometimes take an A3 size sheet. That's because A4 is too small for me. And I enjoy the blank space, but then sometimes I start with the computer. I usually want to do both, interacting and
fun. Yeah, interesting. Yes. So so I mean, all of these things, when we, you know, with GPS now in cars and so on, you know, on our phones, people don't know how to work out where they are anymore.
This is kind of a voluntary memory loss in a way.
It is. You
know, we are willingly giving away. For example, why did some Muslims memorize the whole book, or probably in other religions too? Because they didn't have access to anything, and it was safer to carry something in the mind.
Exactly.
So we need our memory, but maybe we can learn to use it more functional.
Okay, so well, I was just thinking of there's a funny story of apparently the Americans have spent so much money researching how to create a really sophisticated biro pen, you know, ballpoint pen to use in space when they're for the astronauts to do their writing, and the Russians just use a pencil. So, you know, and they also use typewriters now instead of computers, so they can't be hacked. Apparently, that's what I've heard.
It makes sense.
So, you know,
one of the things about this technology-oriented thinking, it seems that concepts of God have been replaced by concepts of technology, relieving oneself, the lazy people, I want to say, of the responsibility and personal effort, etc. You leave things to God. God knows everything, and He'll do the best.
That's right.
Or
that's true.
You leave it to the technology and wait and see. I hate this wait and see. You wait and you see your what? I mean, doom.
Exactly.
Don't wait and see. Do something and see.
Exactly. Yes. So technology, it's a double-edged sword, a mixed blessing. So yes, so the book, I'm very happy that it's come out now in Turkish.
Yes.
My book, and it's in Arabic.
Wonderful.
As well, and it's going to be in several other languages before too long, German and Italian and Greek and Japanese, and so it's really, I'm very pleased to see it. It's democratizing futures thinking.
Exactly. Istanbul Cultural University has been publishing the selected books from the Oxford University Press series.
Yeah, from the VSI.
And we are grateful to them. One of your most important books all of them are important. The post-formal education, it has not been translated into Turkish yet.
No.
Not yet, but
Right.
it should be to all languages. Would you like to mention a few things about it? It's related to the future-oriented
Yes.
approach.
Yes. And it's also related very much to this idea of evolution of consciousness.
Yes.
And evolution of a conscious evolution, how we as humans need to work consciously to evolve and develop our thinking and our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So the book developed out of my PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do my PhD on the evolution of consciousness. I wanted to do it in the psychology department of the university which I was connected with and I'm attached to. And I approached the head of school of psychology, who was a brand new head of school, so head of department. So he was a little bit nervous about his position, and he was he just said, no, I can't. This is sort of too wild. The idea of evolution of consciousness is too big a topic. I can't cope with that. So I thought, what am I going to do? So I went along to a woman who I had known. We shared a postgraduate office when I was doing my master's and she was doing her PhD. And she'd become the head of school in education. So I talked to her about my dilemma and she said, well, if you're prepared to do your PhD on the evolution of consciousness and its implications for education, then you can do it in the education school.
Mm.
And so that's what I did. So the book, Post-Formal Education, is really has grown out of that second half of my PhD, mm-hmm. which is the implications for education mm-hmm. of the evolution of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So what I studied within that part of my PhD was I looked at the research being done by a lot of American adult developmental psychologists mm-hmm. on this idea that that our reasoning, our thinking, our cognitive powers don't stop at what Jean Piaget called formal operations. Mm. Jean Piaget, developmental psychologist, for those who don't know him, had the idea that there were 4 stages of cognitive development and that at about 12 to 18, people sort of who were developing properly developed formal operations or formal logic. Mm. So, and he said that's where it stopped and nothing happened beyond that. So, but these adult developmental psychologists in Harvard and elsewhere said, hang on a bit, that's not quite right. There are mature adults. You know, what about Einstein? What about the quantum theorists? You know, what about all these other highly evolved concepts like complexity and systems thinking and all of that? So they created this concept called post-formal reasoning, mm-hmm. going beyond formal logical, formal reasoning. Mm. And they were doing empirical and theoretical research, and they came up with all these qualities that were found in studies of mature adults. So I sort of cohered all of this and got down to sort of 12 key qualities of post-formal reasoning. And then I started looking at what was happening with education in the 20th century and towards the 21st century and said, hang on a minute, there's also all these really interesting, innovative educational approaches happening. Mm-hmm. There's people in little pockets here and there all over the world. Some of them are working on imagination in education. Someone else is working on complexity in education. People doing holistic and integral education, spirituality in education, even, postmodern education, all these what I call post-formal pedagogies or evolutionary pedagogies were happening, independently around the world, most of them not knowing about each other. So I kind of brought all these together, and I've mapped it. I mean, it's quite a complex process, but I've sort of looked at the post-formal reasoning qualities and these innovative pedagogies that are arising in the world. And basically, through a whole process of analysis and so on, came up with this post-formal education philosophy, which pulls together all these different educational approaches, which I believe if you work with all these different kinds of thinking, you're going to evolve children in a way that they will, as when they become adults, they will be very, mature post-formal thinkers. They'll be able to get complexity theory and systems thinking and paradox and creativity and so on. So they'll
Intuition.
be naturally, intuition, exactly. You got it, intuition,
It's very.
So that's basically what,
Wonderful, wonderful.
That's what that book is about.
And then that gave birth to the book you published last year.
The Secret to Growing Brilliant Children.
Exactly. And
well, yes, go on. Sorry.
No, please. In a minute or two, this will stop, but we can go to the same connection and go on a little bit more, if you wish.
If you wish, or we could round up.
Okay.
We could round up, and then we could have another conversation.
Let's do that
sometime in the future.
Exactly.
More about education. Yeah.
Good idea.
Do we have 1 minute? Do we have a minute?
Yes.
I'd just like to tell you about the courses that I've been creating for the Ubiquity University, which is sort of my current passion is creating these online courses. And one of them is on integral global futures of the environment.
Wonderful.
Which will be, I think, very connected to what you're trying to do with the Earth civilization. So.
Great.
Yes.
So this could be in the next dialogue.
Another conversation as well. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Jennifer Gidley. I'm delighted. Many people will be delighted to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarik. Very much a great pleasure of mine to speak with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Dear Earthmates, may good energies get together and produce further good things.
Thank you very much. To GELECEK.
Yes, to GELECEK.
To GELECEK.
Yes, to the future, yes.